Okay, very often you may have a set of data like we've got here in this commission calculation V2. So, this has details of different employees, where they employed, the years of employment, and what sales they've made. So these are basically all salespeople. Now, as I'm viewing the data, I may want to scroll down, but the moment I scroll down, I actually lose these headings over here. Which actually makes it difficult to see. So when I'm looking at this, I can't really remember what was this number here, for example, these numbers here supposed to represent. So to get around this, if you go into the view option on the ribbon, so on the view tab, you'll basically see an option here called freeze panes. So if you click on freeze panes, you can freeze the top row. So what it'll do is it'll keep the top row visible while you're scrolling through the rest of the sheet, right? So now that I've clicked on it, you can see it's actually, I clicked freeze top row. Now if I scroll down, as I scroll down, it'll always keep row 1 visible. You can see even though I'm on row 38, 39, it keeps row 1 visible, so we can always actually see what the headings are. So just as we're navigating the sheet, this just makes it easier for us to actually be, now that when I'm, for example, looking at these numbers, I know that they represent actual sales, these represent target sales, and so on. Now the same actually applies if you scroll to the right. Let's say I wanted to always have and just for example's sake first, I always wanted to see what the employee code was. As I'm scrolling to the right, once I reach a certain point, you can see I lose the details of the employee code on the extreme left. Now, if I wanted to keep that visible all the time, I go again into the freeze panes and I say freeze the first column. So remember, this is A is the first column, and I freeze it. And basically now, if I go to the right, once you can see column A now is always visible, even though B, C, I've moved so far to the right that B, C, D are no longer visible. We're already starting off at column F here. It'll always keep column A there. So even if I'm looking at a particular line, I can see this, for example, is dealing with E4. The issue with this, though, sometimes is we don't necessarily in this particular instance want to keep the employee code only visible. We would want to also have column 2 of the name visible, because it's probably more useful when I'm scrolling to the right to always have the name of the person visible. So if I'm looking, for example, at this commission percentage, I can see which person it links to. But right now I can't see their name, I can only see the code. So how do we get around that? Well, that's actually fairly easy to do. And the way to do this is to use the final option here, which is basically this one, which is called let's first unfreeze all the panes. So remember, I've got freeze top row, freeze first column. So let's first unfreeze all panes. So what unfreeze will do, it'll bring everything back to normal. So now when I scroll to the bottom, I can't see the first row. And when I scroll to the right, it doesn't actually freeze that first column either, right? So first of all, I've unfroze all the panes. Now I'm going to freeze them in a different way. What I want to do is you want to choose a spot where if you freeze it, everything to the left and above that spot will basically remain in view. So I go to this particular cell because I want both that and that to be visible. So on this cell, if I freeze it here at this point, everything above it, which is that first row, as well as everything to the left of it, will be visible. So if I go now freeze panes, right, and I just select the freeze panes. So what it says is keep rows and columns visible while the rest of the spreadsheet scrolls. So I'm not using the freeze top row or freeze column, I'm just using freeze panes. Remember, I needed to unfreeze anything that was there before this became available as an option. So now I click on freeze panes. Now you can see it does a little line over there and also below it. It's a very slight gray line, so you may not notice it. But now when I scroll down, it's still keeping that row, that first row visible. It's frozen. But when I go to the right, you can see it's keeping both of these columns frozen. So as I go further to the right, I'll always have those two columns available. So that's the one way you can do it. This is also actually important, just to show you. If I just click on freeze panes and unfreeze again, sometimes you may actually have two rows. Let's say you may have two rows at the top that represent your headers, right? So here, remember, we only had this particular row, but let's just insert another one. And I just say, I'm just going to put in some, this is not real data. I just call it H1, H2, but let's assume this was part of the headers that we wanted to keep, right? So I just put it in there. Now, you can't really use a freeze. I'm just going to unfreeze first. Okay, so nothing is frozen. If it shows you freeze panes, it means nothing is currently frozen. Now, the point I wanted to make is if I said freeze the top row only using this option, if I say freeze top row, it only keeps the H1s, and I want both of these rows to be frozen. So the way you would do that, if I only wanted rows frozen, I didn't care about the columns, I would go to this point over here so that everything above the cell will be frozen, which includes both of those rows. And I'm not freezing any columns, so I'm in the first column. So this would freeze no columns. And if I now go unfreeze basically everything, and now at this point here, we're on the cell A3, if I go to freeze panes now, Now if I scroll down, you can see it keeps both of those rows frozen, but it doesn't keep any columns frozen. So as I go to the right, you with me, it's not going to freeze any of the columns because I was in column A3. There was no columns to the left of the point when I started the freezing option. If I want to keep both of the top 2 rows frozen as well as these 2 columns, what I would do is I would need to go into this cell over here, into cell C3. So both of the columns to the left of it would be frozen and both of the rows above it would be frozen. And so to freeze on this basis, you first go and unfreeze whatever the previous freeze was. And now we click again and we say freeze panes being in the cell C3. Now if I scroll down, you can see both of the rows are frozen. And if I go to the right, both of the 2 left columns are frozen. So you can choose any point in the spreadsheet on which to freeze things. But usually, I mean, because most of the time it's just the leftmost column that you want to freeze, and very often it's only the top row that you want to freeze. That's why these 2 options are there for you, just to make it quick to do. So you can just quickly freeze the top row or the first column. But if you need to freeze more than just the top row or more than just the first column, you can use the method as I showed you over there. Select a cell, and remember the rule is anything to the left of that cell and above that cell will be frozen.